Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and a very good day to all of you, my dear students. I hope that you are doing well. A very warm welcome to lecture number 30 of report writing skills. The figure tells you that we are coming towards the end, and with special reference to lecture number 30 and the one which will come ahead. Within these two lectures, we are going to see and summarize all the components, all the topics that we have covered within the previous lectures. And that is going to be very much helpful, especially for you when you'll be going through the lectures. You'll be getting ready and well prepared for your final assessment and examination. And keeping in view that need, that purpose, these two lectures will be designed and will cover all the important components which are needed to make you efficient enough and well equipped with all the concepts that you need to attempt your final exams in the best possible manner. And of course, it will also help you to become a good individual, a good professional, of course, because you're going to have each and every component that was studied separately now within a single lecture. So how good is that? And you're going to feel the advantage, you're going to see it. So with that, of course, now as I just mentioned within these slides of our today's lecture, we'll be going through right from the start. So it all begins from where it all started. So in case of our today's lecture and the initial slides, it'll give you a quick review of what we covered at the beginning. It all started from the report, and just the way you know, in course, if we talk about the report, it's basically a structured form of writing which involves the identification, the examination, and organization. Just think of those three circles which I talked about. So identification means, of course, you have to identify a problem, and once you identify it, only then you'll be able to examine it. And once the examination is complete, you'll have some results, you're going to come up with some conclusion, but everything has to be presented in an organized form. So that's why you basically involve the organization part as well. And in this way, you basically get this structured form of writing, which is basically the general concept when we talk about a report. What does it do? What's the purpose? So in that case, it is basically used for information, for persuasion, for an influence, and for initiating a decision. Of course, everything one way or another is oriented or directed towards your audience. So basic purpose is that you either want to inform them, and moving ahead, if it's not just restricted to the information, you basically persuade them. What's the purpose of persuasion? You basically want to influence their outlook, their perspective, their thinking, their ideologies. So that is one purpose as well. Through that persuasion, through that valid information that you have collected, you try to put an influence on their thinking. And with that change in thinking, you are able to initiate a decision as well. So in this way, you can clearly identify what basic purpose of a report is. If you talk about the report in detail, it's basically a very well-planned document which clearly outlines and evaluates a subject or a problem. So now you know, after all the instructions that you just got within the previous lecture, you know a lot of planning is needed when you have to simply start thinking of a report or report writing. You need to do this understanding and planning just the way we discussed in the previous lecture. You have to identify a problem, and that problem will be stated within the purpose. You have to look towards nature of the audience, and keeping in view that nature of the audience, you have to state the benefits in the form of the significance of the study. You move ahead, you define a scope, you set a boundary, just the way we talked about. So in that way, everything is well planned, and once things are clear within your mind, only then you can move ahead to the next step, and that is of course doing that pre-writing, the free writing or the listing, and basically using all the techniques that you need to come up with some drafting. But the point here is, well-planned document. You need the planning which is needed, and then you are able to move ahead. What you basically do in case of a report, analyzing a problem and then making some recommendation for future action. So this is the ultimate goal. You are given a problem, you analyze it, you look into it in detail, and then you come up with some results. There are some findings, you interpret it, and on the basis of that interpretation you come up with some suggestions and recommendation, and that is how it all comes to an end. So that's how the planning leads toward a written form that you provide, you submit to your target or intended audience. You move ahead. In case of this report writing, it's basically a medium of professional communication, planning and decision making. Now this reminds me once again of how our talk began at the very first lecture. I just told you very gradually, very steadily, at a very slow pace, just to make you clear why this course is important, why report writing itself is important. You move ahead, you will come at situations where everything has to be put in written. A written account of all the actions, all the decisions is needed, and you basically do it in the form of a report. That's why it's needed, and which is why it's written over here that it's a medium of professional communication. This is basically the point which has to be made clear, and then of course it leads you towards some planning and decision making. Moving ahead, it is complete, it is compact, clear, and presented in a very lucid style. So this is also another component which should be noted down, and we have talked about it in detail, that nothing should be missed out. The C of completeness should be there. Of course, we are going to talk about it after a while, but the point here is all the necessary information should be there, and that is how it will be complete. Otherwise, if any component is missing, of course, it will be considered as incomplete. Compact, everything has been provided, everything is there, but in a concrete form, in a compact form, in a concise form. Nothing is being repeated again and again. Nothing is being provided in lengthened or extended form of sentences. We know the standard, we talked about it, the conventional length, of course, which is the acceptable sentence length of around not more than 20 words is acceptable. It's okay, because once it exceeds this limit, then you have to think of some way of breaking up the sentence. Otherwise it will become that run-on sentence that we talked about in detail. So you have to think of those strategies as well. But the point here is it should provide all the complete information. It should be there and in a clear way so that your audience can follow it, rather than getting confused with everything that you have written. And of course presented in a very lucid, a clear style. Everything is there where it should fit. And if a reader like me wants to see some component, so it should be categorized separately, and some page number should be mentioned within the table of contents. Only then I would be able to follow it, as it has this accessible document design that we studied within the objectives and the traits, which will also come ahead. But move ahead. In case of the reader or the nature of the audience, the focus of the reader of course varies depending on their nature. As we talked about them, you basically have those three categories, especially with respect to your technical writing or your professional writing. You have those general readers, of course, who do not have that much of expertise when it comes to the technical knowledge, and that is why there is always a need to go into the detail. You require some detail that is needed, rather than just going for the abbreviations and the acronyms and providing there is a limited use of sentence and more use of those graphs, figures, charts and tables. So that can cause a bit of problem when it comes to the general readers. So you have to textually explain these components as well when it comes to the general readers. You move ahead and talk about the managerial readers. These are the ones, of course, we have talked about them within the professional environment. Your boss, the administrative team, they are really busy. They have to do multiple tasks, although it seems like that you are the only one working, but everyone is working and they're also quite occupied. And that is why when you have to interact with them and you have to share any component with them, you have to simply use this technique of keeping your words limited and putting more information with the limited use of word. This is also one of the examples. This can be considered as one purpose why executive summary exists at the very beginning of a report, because they'll just look into it and everything should be there, especially within this executive summary. We're going to cover it as well when we talk about the structure of a report. But right now, with special reference to the nature of the audience, in case of your managerial or the administrative team, they just look at the executive summary. They're not into what you have in case of the graphs, the tables, or what you have written in detail. They do not have time for it. In case of your technical readers, things become a little different, because these are the ones who have their focus more on the graphs, the figures, the tables. They're going to interpret everything by looking into these things. They're not oriented towards your details. They're not that much into the executive summary. Of course, they can look into it if they want to, but they are the ones who have the expertise, the technical expertise, and they're going to look towards these things for the interpretation and for getting all the things that they require. And keeping in view everything, there is another important point which should be there in mind, just the way we covered it as well. While writing things, while providing things, while presenting information, the preferences of the active voice, because you become the voice rather than what you are doing. You should be there as well and should be presented. That's the way you basically prefer the active voice. And moving ahead, use of third person. So the presence of some task being performed, but still another point to remember is, this is basically the trick, that you have to keep your own subjectivity aside as well. Do not become part of it by putting in your personal opinion, because that is going to change it into a subjective document, and that is not expected to be there within this report writing, because it has to be objective. And for that, you basically use the third person, keeping yourself aside. I, me, or my opinion, that will stay aside. You basically prefer the third person, which is why it's mentioned here, and use the active voice, because it's going to make the whole language of the content more active rather than making it passive. Another thing, of course, to support what I have just mentioned, you have to avoid the personal pronouns as well. Again, the same point, it's there for the explanation that these personal pronouns, the ones which are referring back to you, are going to make this whole document more subjective. It will look biased, it will look partial, and it will look more affiliated. But that is not the purpose, especially when it comes to writing a report. It has to be made professional, and professionalism demands that you stay objective, especially within such documents in which you have to come up with some technical information. You have to identify, analyze, examine, and then provide the results. This is the purpose, and when this is the purpose, your subjectivity is not demanded over here. So this is basically the difference. What can you do in addition to avoiding these personal pronouns, using third persons and using the active voice? Of course, you can make it more authentic by properly citing, one thing, credible authors, not just ordinary authors. You have to look into their component, look into their authenticity, look into their work as well. Where is it being published? What is the category? All these things are going to matter. And even you look at the year of publication as well. So if it's more recent, it will look more fresh and current and contemporary, that you are working on something which is the hot topic of the day, rather than referring back to past and taking references or citing authors who have worked at a very far time. So that is going to make it a bit less authentic, less credible, and believable. The point here is you have to make it more contemporary. So this is also one way of making it an objective report, a more authentic report. Then if you move ahead, this is basically the way you have to structure it. We talked about it, especially within the initial lectures. It all begins from you start with a title page. That is basically the beginning, the very title page which is placed first. And what should be there with an appropriate format, you have to provide who is basically writing the report, for whom the report is being written, what is basically the time in which the report has been written and submitted, and of course the most important, what is basically the title and what's the report all about. So these are the four components which should be there, especially with reference to your title page. These four things are demanded and these should be there because that's how you present it. You move ahead right after the title page, your preliminary pages take a start. If you remember, with such special reference to what we talked about in the previous one. So title page, then you have the preliminary pages, then you have the main body text, and then your supplementary pages in which you have the appendix and alongside the work cited. So these are the components which are organized in a proper sequence, and now we are looking to them in detail as we are going through everything that we have done. So in case of your executive summary that you provide, especially for the managerial readers, so it has to be qualitative, and by quality, avoiding the use of those statistics and numerical data. Just explain it qualitatively. Then what to include within this executive summary? Well, you require a purpose. You have to clearly state it. Just the way you wrote in detail, you have to make it short and you have to state it, why you are doing it. That becomes your purpose. What's the reason because of which you are doing it? So identify, if you have identified the problem, of course you want to resolve it, and that becomes your purpose. That's the reason because of which you're doing it. The purpose of my research is this. And we have looked into multiple examples, multiple samples of the executive summary, the way it's written. Its different parts were highlighted. I highlighted them, which is why a little bit of less highlighting here within the lecture. Right after it, you state the prospective and the anticipated outcome. What is going to be the outcome of this study? So you mention this outcome as well with some results, and without using, once again, any abbreviation, because these abbreviation is going to cause a little bit of problem. I give you the reason that the managerial readers have not gone through the whole document. They probably and they usually look towards the executive summary itself to decide whether it's really worth reading or not. And if you are coming up with these abbreviation whose meaning is basically provided afterwards within the main body or either the conclusion at the end, so they're not going to follow it, which is why it's always better to avoid these abbreviation unless and until they are very much common within public, that even the lay audience knows what this abbreviation is for. Then of course you can use it, but in general it's preferred not to use them, especially with reference to your executive summary. So what to state over here? Within the parentheses you have the points. You should state the purpose, mention the method which will be used, and which was used of course because you are writing it after doing everything. So then what were the findings, and then on the basis of those findings, what's your conclusion, within which you're going to give a little bit of a flashback of what was the purpose, the objectives, and how were those objectives achieved, what were my findings, which you are going to mention by using logical deduction, just the way you did within the previous lecture. And on the basis of this conclusion, paving the way for coming up with some suggestions and recommendation, which means that now after changing the perspectives of the audience, you are trying to persuade them, you are trying to initiate a decision, and that's why recommendation section becomes important. You move ahead. The next component, of course, which is there within your preliminary pages, is the table of contents. Doesn't require that much of explanation because it's all about the way you sequence your writing. What's there within chapter 1, what's coming ahead within chapter 2, and talking about chapter 1 again, what are the other subsections which are there within the first chapter that you are going to cover, and which section can be found on which page. That information is to be there within your table of contents, which is why it's very much important Nothing that much new for you. You see them in every book, which is why even I am just telling it generally. So to make it, even if you have to make it for your own project report, it can't be that difficult. Of course, just open up Microsoft Word document within which the top icons have this option of making a table of contents. You have to just select those degree of headings, just the way I told you, just the way I explained it to you, that your first level becomes 1.1, the second degree becomes 1.1.1, and then the third degree, if it's needed, becomes 1.1.1.1. This is the way you basically divide them. You have the degrees of heading, and once you are following these degrees of heading, and then you of course want to make the table of contents, you click over it, it'll simply organize everything. If you have placed the subsections within the right section, placing the page number on the right hand side. So not a big deal, even if this oral explanation becomes a little bit tricky, a bit confusing. Tutorials are there in abundance, so just go through any tutorial how to make a table of content in Microsoft Word. You're going to have all the details that you need, but it is there and it is needed, so it should be prepared, especially within this hardbound report should be there. And then of course, if I miss anything, you have to give reference to the work cited. Additional material has to be mentioned as well in the form of the appendix. So that's how you basically move ahead with it. Moving ahead, right after it, you start with your introduction. Of course, you have given its reference within the table of content, but that's not the end of the story. You have to provide this background and description of the problem at the very beginning of your introduction, because just the way I told you, your readers are from different categories. If you already know who they are, then you can make it more specific. But if you are a little bit, not a bit in doubt, then of course follow the sequence, provide background in such a way that a lay audience or the general reader can also follow up with the concept that you want to explain and is able to follow up with that problem that you want to state. So provide some background, just the way you got the background for stress, what it is, how it affects the employees. Then moving ahead, describe the problem in detail, how it affects the, if I talk about, once again, that reference, the negative effects that is there on the job performance of an employee. So this is basically the problem which has been identified, and now it will be explored. Now it will be analyzed by, of course, some statistics, by simply collecting some data, and on the basis of which you state your objectives that you're going to focus, what will be the target, of course, the highest, which task was highly affected, which task was least affected. So that's how you state the objectives, and what was the method which was used, and what expected outcome do you anticipate to achieve. So that's how you basically place it. And then of course, not a big deal. I don't think it'll be that much troubling for you, because now you know what's the scope. We talked about it. Once again, that boundary within which you basically carry out the study. Cannot overgeneralize those results over the other areas as well. Those areas you can leave them for the other researchers as well. And then what are the limitations of your study? If you have missed something, this is the time to mention it here, paving the way for the other researchers that they may take what you have missed. So this is what you basically cover up and mention within the introductory session as well. Then comes the next section, which simply reflects that you have done a very thorough, very comprehensive, very detailed study of what you want to study, identify, analyze and examine, and then present before the other audience. So for that you have looked into a big body of knowledge related to that area, related to that variable, related to that problem which is being investigated, which is being analyzed. So keeping in view all those facts and collecting all the statistics, citing all the credible author, you have come up with some conclusion, or you have made your mind clear how to go through this task, how to simply look into this component, analyze it, and how to collect the data, because you have looked into all the other authors, all the other researchers who have worked within the same field or a field similar to it. So in this way, this basically also demands you to do some critical thinking once you are reading the works of other people. So you are critically analyzing their work and their results. So this demands critical thinking. And why do you do it? To formulate a deeper and more profound understanding of the problem that will be investigated. And then who are being cited? Of course, the credible authors and of course the reliable sources. Those results do not change when they are retested. So that's how this becomes valid as well as reliable. So that's how you're going to write the review of related literature section of your report, especially with reference to the structure of a report. You move ahead, the next section, of course, within your report structure is the methodology. And this is the one in which you provide a theoretical description of the design, what design was chosen, what is basically the method, how you basically, what is the basic source of data collection, questionnaire, survey or interviews, what's your population, what's your basic sample, how you have collected that sample using a sampling technique, is there any statistical technique that you will apply on the data which you will collect from them or have collected from them. So everything has to be stated here. If there is any question there, how have you structured it and in how many parts is it divided, and of course you provide the sample itself, a copy of that questionnaire at the end of your report as well within the appendix section. So that is how you basically have the methodology section as well. After the application, you get the next section in which you come up with some results, and this is the place where once again you have to make the decision whether your audience is the journal, the high tech, the low tech. That is something which you have to determine. But the purpose here is you basically keep a balance of the textual explanation and all the graphics that you are using, be it table, charts or graphs, anything. Textual explanation accompanied with figures, tables and diagrams. So everything will go aligned and parallel to one another. You have to provide textual explanation on one hand and provide a graph, provide a table alongside it, rather than keeping it on another side or deleting it from the whole document. That is not going to help you out. So present the results. Results are also presented within a report. On the basis of those results, then comes the next section where you come up with some discussion. By comparing and contrasting the results of two different variables, you can sort out or you can extract some creative solution of the problem. And this is basically the point, which is discussion. Under the heading of discussion, you can come up with these solution and you can just wrap it up, you can sum it up and then move towards the next section where you present some conclusion. After doing this logical deduction, you have to state first of all what were you doing, a comprehensive summary of the main points, the objectives, the purpose of the report, what it was, and then what you have done within the discussion section, all the analysis that you have done, you provide your logical deduction, your inference, what you have inferred from everything you have looked into, and this will once again pave the way for the recommendation. And this is everything that you do within the conclusion section. You have looked into all the examples. Right now the purpose here is to sum up everything so that we may not miss out anything. And based on this conclusion section, you basically now move to the next section where you provide all the recommendation. And within this recommendation section, you basically provide what has to be implemented, then what is the general applicability, what are the suitability of all the findings. Then you also not only just end it over here, but give some suggestions, some valid, some authentic, some pertinent, meaning relevant suggestions for the upcoming or the future researchers for what they can do to contribute within the same body of knowledge, within the same area of investigation and area of study. That is how you basically structure it. And once you have provided those set of recommendations, as you have seen them in multiple examples, then you provide that works cited page, and works cited page can of course either be done manually, just the way I just went through that task. I know how difficult and tough it was even while I was explaining to you the use of punctuation, the slashes, the italics, the bold, everything the way I told you, especially for the MLA style and the APA style. But then I gave you that last slide in which all those different tools were shared with you. So use those tools and make a list for yourself of all the works which you have cited within your work, and that has to be placed, and that is basically placed at the end. Once you have concluded, once you have recommended, it comes here, and right afterwards you basically provide your appendices. So if there was any question here, place it over here. If there were some specific interview questions that you have asked for collecting your data, place them over here. This is basically the place. Anything which is having such a length, such an extended length that it cannot be fitted, it will not look appropriate to fit them within the main body of the report. So that's why it's not even directly linked, and having such a length, such a long length that it will not fit into the report itself, the main body, you place it at the end, so that even if you place it at a side and the main body is presented to someone, it will make sense. For some further reference, of course, they can look into the kind of questions which were asked. So that's why you place appendix at a side, and that is the purpose because of which the appendix itself exists. Otherwise, there wasn't any need, and they would have placed everything within the body of the report. The reason why it exists separately is the reason why it should be separated. You move ahead, then we talked about some modes of report writing. Now, this was one way or another kind of confused with some types of report, but it's not types of report, it's basically the way you go on with your writing a report. So there can be two strategies. One is the deductive mode of report writing, which is basically used and should be used especially for sharing journal information, some information which is neutral. Of course, a report is generally used for neutral information. It should be presented in an impartial way, but more or less related with this journal information, routine messages, because if there is in such mode of report writing, if there is anything specific which is coming, it will come at the end, because it all begins with this general pattern of providing the information, the general information itself, and gradually moving some specific component which comes at the end. So this pattern of providing general information and moving towards the specific, if it comes at the end, is the deductive mode of report writing. And I told you that within this one, you basically provide the discussion at the end, especially for if there is any specific component. So it will demand an explanation, but that will come at the end. Whereas if you consider it to be some information which is specific and demands some explanation, especially for the audience who can offer you some resistance over it, then you go for the inductive mode of report writing, where there is some use of specific factual information because it's specific. So to defend it, to defend that specific information, you need some proof, some evidence, and that becomes in the form of those statistics, some facts, some figures. In other words, factual information to draw some general conclusions. So that is basically the strategy used in case of your readers who are well informed, and used when some resistance is expected from this informed audience as well. So this is basically the general difference. Over here you can also say that in case of your inductive report, as a result of defending all those specific points that you are making at the very beginning, your discussion section will be coming at the beginning, because you have to defend what you have to say. Whereas in case of deductive, it can go at the end, because you are stating things which are already considered to be the general information. So discussion can go at the end, whereas in case of your inductive mode of report writing, it will be there at the very beginning. You move ahead, and then we talked within lecture 5 about the types of the report, and within these types of report I told you that you generally categorize them. There are many types, but for your convenience and I would say for your understanding, we talked about the important ones which are in use, which are used, and even in your case will be used and are being used. So we talked about the informal report at the beginning and defined them as the ones which have short length. Now follow the steps. How do you differentiate between the two? The informal report have short length, relatively short length, and with some particular formality. There are some norms, some principles, some rules, and some formats of structuring and writing this informal report. Why is it written? It is written for the audience within an organization, and you can also say for this cross-departmental communication within an organization and between two organizations at some occasions as well. But in general, especially between two organizations, it demands more formality, and formality demands this formal report. But I will talk about it in a while. While referring to this informal report, you have these examples, and we talked about them. You looked into their images, their examples, the samples which were shared with you. So it can be a progress report which demands you to simply share what progress is being made so far on anything that you are doing. So you have to share a progress report. Then of course, sales activity, in which I told you, we talked about it, that you have to show how much profit was gained, how much have we lost. So it's like a graph. It provides you with all the statistics. The numerical data is also there occurring and is there within this sales activity report. But everything is, you know, in case of this sales activity, you can also say that more numerical data will be expected, which means in this case your audience is more or less the technical ones, because they want to see numbers and they'll just figure it out all by themselves. They do not demand that much of text, whereas this is just right now, by looking at these examples, I'm telling you, logical deduction and inference. In case of your progress, they would like to see some textual information as well, because they want to see how much progress have you made, which is why you have to accompany some textual with some proof as well, and you can provide the statistics as well. Moving ahead, personal evaluation. I told you it's all about your report, your annual report that your boss sends to the HR for your further renewal of the contract. It all depends on the way you have performed. So the way you handle different tasks, the way you use your leadership skills, the way you use your communication skills, the way you use your organizational skills, the way you managed everything. How did you react at a difficult situation? How did you help out others? What was your attitude overall with the workplace station? So point here is, each and every component will be analyzed, and its numerical representation is basically presented alongside the textual information within this personal evaluation report, also known as the annual confidential report, because it's kept a bit confidential. Few components are shared, few are not, so that's why it becomes the confidential report as well. You talk about the financial report. This is the ones in which you basically share. It's more or less like the bank statement is like a good example. I told you about it. The way you simply get a data of what have you debited, what have you credited, at what time, at what place, and on what date. So this is also like a written account of what you have been doing, and you have this special professional relation with the bank. That's why it's bound for that bank to give you a written statement of how you have been spending things and at what time and at what place. So they give you a written account of it, and that is like an example of a financial report as well. Feasibility, to look into the feasibility of the suggested points, to how much extent are they feasible, should they be implemented, are they applicable or not, what are the suitability of the findings. So you have to talk about it, you have to explain them in the form of a feasibility report. If you have to review some components, if you have to review a book, if you have to review a report itself, and you write a report over a report, so this is also like, basic purpose is your review is needed and you have to review it, and there is a way of reviewing things as well. but what you write becomes a review report as well. Credit report, as I told you, all about the way if you have taken some loan, if you have taken some debt, if you want to return it back within installments, so all that program, the way you're going to return it if you have taken some loan, so that program becomes this credit report in which you're going to credit things to them, and even it can be otherwise as well, but this becomes an example of credit report as well. But these things are more or less more numerical, more data specific, so that's why they are brief, and which is why they are placed within the category of the informal report. But if they become more lengthened, situation can change as well. You talk about the formal report, you are more aware of it, you know what this is, long and detailed, more complex as it involves something. What? First the identification, then some data collection based on that problem that you're investigating, then it's careful analysis, and on the basis of that analysis you come up with some interpretation. You basically interpret your results and findings, and the result and interpretation of the data is basically presented within the conclusion on the basis of which you recommend something. So this basically is the logical sequence when you talk about a formal report, and for that I told you that there are the categories, the informational, in which the more focus and concentration is towards the provision of information. That is the ultimate goal. They have assigned you a task, they want you, your boss, the ones who are assigning you to write a report, prepare a formal report, they want you to investigate the topic, collect data, analyze it, and basically provide us the information that we demand, that we need. In case of the analytical, their focus is more on your analysis section. The previous one can be taken to be more or less related with how you review things, how you study things. So your discussion section, your review section, or your introductory section in which you basically provide the background on some topic, on some problem which has been assigned to you, becomes more important. The analytical section is the one in which your immediate readers would be more interested to see how you analyze this situation, how you analyze the problem, how did you collect the data, one thing, and then how you analyzed it, and this analysis will be of course presented within your results and discussion section. So this becomes important as well, because everything that you have analyzed will be presented within these sections as well. So this becomes important as well. And then moving ahead within the recommendation section, now your readers will be more oriented, they will be anticipating and they'll be expecting to get some good recommendations from you, which means that now you do not just have to restrict yourself towards providing information or doing just the analysis, but based on that analysis, what conclusion do you draw from it? What logical deductions are there within your mind? What do you extract out of it, and how do you present it, and on the basis of that conclusion, what recommendations do you make? So your recommendations, and how do you write the recommendation, we looked into it, suitability of all the findings, what is the applicability of your recommendation, are they really practicable, are they really workable or not? So that will be considered as well, that will be analyzed too. So you have to pick out of these three very carefully, keeping in view what you basically are doing and whether it really fits with the problem which is being investigated. And then we also talked about some additional forms, which are the narrative one, in which you basically provide things in a chronological way in a narrative form. The specialized version, in which I talked about it, that if you have to write a report on the results of multiple reports, so after reading them you prepare this specialized report which covers the components of all the others. So this becomes the specialized version. In case of the accident report, this is the one in which you basically have to report on some accident which has happened. So not that new for you, you get to see such reports as well, but this is also one of the category which falls under this heading of the types of report. And now based on it we can move ahead to see what we covered ahead while talking about technical writing. So right after giving you some detailed talk on structuring of a report, types of a report, and what it is, basically we move ahead to cover the rest of the components of our outline, and we talked about the technical writing, of which a report is one part. So then, talking about technical writing itself, what it is, even you can tell me, form of writing which communicates specific and factual information to a defined audience for a defined purpose. So these are the things which makes it different from an ordinary writing or from creative writing. Technical writing demands from you to come up with some factual information, being aware of your audience, who is your audience, and of course with a purpose. That's the reason because of which you have a clearly defined purpose even in case of a report. When you have a purpose, only then you are able to state it. And in a similar way, it is expected here within the other forms of technical writing as well. But how did it develop? I talked about it. It was an interesting talk. In case of recording the history, all the developments, all the inventions, so those inventions were basically scientific, and they have to be interpreted, they have to be written in this a technical way, and that technical way of writing gradually gave rise to the technical writing as well. But I won't say that that was the ultimate or the special origin of technical writing. Of course, I mention it here, I remember it, that it would have existed even in past time as well, but the ways of preserving our writing were not that modern as they are nowadays. Now, you know, even by clicks we are able to save it, by taking pictures we are able to save it, by getting photocopied we can save it. But the previous times were more or less related to carving things on wood, on cave stones, and these were some of the ways in which they were able to do some writing, draw things. So those carvings, those printings are few of those technical writing. Even if I have to call it technical writing, I am saying it. I'm not saying that some other have said it, but the point is that is also one way of preserving thing, but the ways of preserving were less. So the recorded history has some components of technical writing, and then we talked about Da Vinci and Copernicus, Galileo, the way they have come up with things, their inventions, and I mention it here that it all existed in technical writing. And with the passage of time, of course, the advent of literacy, the way it improved, coming down from that class distinction, because earlier it was restricted to aristocracy, the royalist and the aristocracy. I'm talking about the upper, the elite, gradually started to come towards bourgeois, the working, the proletariat, and then gradually coming down towards the other strata of the class or the people. So gradually it started to become more common. Earlier only they were the readers, but now the common people started to read as well, and gradually the ways of writing started to change as well. But the point here is, with this increasing literacy, this knowledge had to be taught as well, had to be shared as well. So that also became one way of expanding this writing as well, technical writing. So in this way it also developed. Then World War, I talked about it, that this World War demanded this knowledge of the use of tools, and you can only learn to use a tool if you know some way in which you can be taught it. So everything was jotted down, the way these weapons, the way these tools can be used, and the readers were able to figure it out how to use it. Of course, they were given the practical, demos as well, but things were brought in written as well, and that's how technical writing flourished as well. And it even flourished in this age of computer revolution. Now things have become even more enhanced. Everything is available in the palm of your hand. So these are some of the ways that I talked about. Moving ahead, what basically it covers. So always you have some instructions to use anything, some machinery, some directions, and then to apply it, and of course some policies which are being made within an organization, some technical reports which are being written to identify, examine, and share some solution to a problem by coming up with some recommendation. So that's how technical writing becomes important. and with reference to the kind of examples that we covered, an instructional manual for repairing a machinery, a memo listing agenda of a meeting, letter from a vendor to a client, or a recommendation report which is proposing a new computer system, are all the ways in which technical writing is used nowadays and is being used. Moving ahead, the way we cover and will be covering within our upcoming sections, these are also the ways of technical writing. You write a letter formally in a professional environment, you write an email, a memo, a website, a brochure. Everything has this professional way of writing because you want to deal with the audience professionally, and this professionalism demands technical writing, which is where it's found within all these examples. Then we moved ahead to look into those features. What are those traits which make writing a technical writing? What are those qualities and what are those objectives? Objectives are more or less related to what are the qualities, what are the characteristics, what are the features and traits of a technical writing. So how do you make it technical writing? So it all begins with clarity. Clarity means that you basically make it or make your writing easily understood by the intended audience, which means first you know what or who your audience is. If that's clearly defined, then you can write your basically writing in such a way that it's easily understood and comprehensible. How do you do it? Of course, by using some active voice, keeping your language active, keeping your language objective, by keeping your personal self at a side, coming up with opinion by using third person, and alongside the transitional words to link things and to move from one section to the other within your writing. You move ahead and then you talk about the conciseness. And what did we talk about in conciseness? Conciseness, of course, mean that you say your thing with the limited use of words. So within this technical writing, you also have to apply this C of conciseness by making things brief and crisp. And how do you make things brief? By deleting redundancy and deleting some double words such as collaborated together. This is the one which came in mind. Collaborated together. If you simply say collaborated, that's okay, nothing wrong with it. Meaningless words, meaning sort of, kind of, you know, I mean, so obviously, and sometimes even I also say, I guess, so in talk it's acceptable because while speaking you have to think and you can come up with these word fillers, but in case of technical writing these are not accepted and these are not expected to be there within your writing as well. So redundancy has to be removed as well, just the way I told you. These doubled expressions are going to cause a repetition and should be avoided as well. Then redundancy also happens when you can simply write an adjective rather than an adjectival phrase. So rather than saying this thing is round in shape, why saying in shape? When if you simply say this thing is round, it's okay, round in shape, making things long, keep it short. This is basically conciseness and turning basically things from phrases to words. In case of your traits of technical writing, you have to make it like an accessible document design. Everything fits into where it should be rather than any sort of confusion. You place every necessary information alongside bullets, alongside headings, alongside italics, italicizing things, underlining things, and placing graphs as well. So that's how, even I gave you one sample. I presented you with an example in the very beginning of lecture 1. I guess it was lecture 1 or 2, but the point here is that the graph was there on the right hand side, text coming here, then some points were presented in bulleted form, the bullets were there. Everything should be fitted and placed where it should be. That's how you make it an accessible document design. And the table of content also helps, as it tells you which section to find on which page. So that's how you're going to make it accessible document design, which is why TOC is also very much important. Then the audience recognition. You have to recognize who is your audience, and Now just look into it. The examples are also there. If I talk about the high tech, more or less, they are concerned with the abbreviation. Abbreviation means they want to see things in a very concise way, in a short way. So if you write abbreviation, they're going to follow you. But if you start moving up with, the explanations, that's going to cause trouble for you as well. So determine who is going to be your audience, because in case of the high tech, they demand and you should use abbreviation. In case of a low tech, who are not there working with you alongside, who are within your organization but at some lower level, do not have the same knowledge, are not aware of what you are doing. So for that, alongside these abbreviation, some parenthetical definitions as well. And in case of lay, who are not who are not at all within that organization, but this information has to be shared with them, do not have that sufficient technical knowledge as well. So for that, you have to come up with some explanation as well of all the abbreviation, parenthetical explanation, provide alongside some detailed explanation as well for them, keeping in view the multiculturalism as well. They can have multicultural nature as well. Your audience can be multicultural as well. And then we talked about the kind of steps, the kind of tips and points which should be there within your mind, not to hurt their feeling, not to disrespect their culture, not to harm their social norms, their values, their traditions, their customs. They shouldn't be affected, they shouldn't be ridiculed, they shouldn't be mocked, whatsoever you are doing or whatsoever you are writing. And what else it demands is that there should be accuracy, and accuracy is basically the grammatical correction and accuracy. This is basically achieved by your peer review and by using some grammar check techniques or softwares. So through that, you basically make it an accurate document as well, and this is basically expected from a technical writing. You move ahead, and then we talked about the writing process. Now this was also a very interesting part, and I told you why it's that significant. We are not that much confident about our writing. We used to get shy. We are not sure how to extract our thoughts on a piece of paper. So there were some tips and tricks we talked about, and it all basically begins not just from writing, but it's called what you basically do before writing, the pre-writing stage, known as the invention stage, which of course involves planning about your purpose and defining your audience. Now even look at this stage as well. Don't you think it's also related with what you do and what you will do in report writing? You have to clearly define your purpose and clearly define who's going to be your audience, because once you define the audience, you will write a significant section, and if you know the purpose, you can write it if you have identified clearly the problem or what you really want to investigate, what you really want to do, why you are doing this. So it has to be made clear, especially within this invention stage of pre-writing. Once you start thinking over it, you will discover ideas, and gradually you will start narrowing it down. What will be narrowed down? Your interest in a specific subject area. How do you basically do it? As there are a variety of basic techniques for this pre-writing. You basically list your ideas together just the way you can do even for selecting those sections which are to be included within your report. Rapid sketches, whatever comes in your mind, you start sketching it, all the ideas, whether you can write it or whether you can draw it, you do it rapidly. You can have conversation with someone, and this talk is going to simply come up with some new ideas, either in your mind or the one with whom you are conversing. Doodling is more or less just the way you do it on smartphones as well, but you basically doodle whatsoever comes in mind. It's more or less a little bit writing something or writing some idea. And then sketching becomes that if it's not an idea in the form of a text, then you simply try to express it by drawing it. So this becomes sketching as well. The circle technique, we talked about it, that you have to start from specific and then broaden it. This small circle is going to simply show that you are thinking, it's your perspective over some problem. If I'm talking about unemployment, so if unemployment is a problem, what's your say over it? What's your perspective on it? that will be a small circle. Then you're going to draw a bigger circle over that small circle, and that is going to tell you what's your country's perspective over it, how the whole country thinks over it. This is going to be your country's perspective, or your community's, your countrymen's perspective. And then you're going to draw a bigger circle over it, and that will be the world's perspective over this problem of unemployment being investigated. But these are not the specific circles. I mean that you do not have to just jump over country and then the world. It can be your family, the bigger circle, then your relatives, then your neighborhood, then your city, then your country, and then the world. So it can go as much as you want it to. You can draw as many circles as you want, but this is also a technique. Then you can also do the clustering, in which you simply draw different small circles, within you place your ideas, and then you connect them together to find one common idea. Or you can go in another way, the central circle, the central idea, and then every idea which comes in your mind is simply drawn out from it in a separate circle, and then you can interconnect them as well. So this becomes clustering. If you do not want to do this, you really want to write something over something, so start writing it. Simply, irrespective of all the mistakes, grammatical mistakes which may happen, just start writing it, whether italicizing or writing it, whether capitalizing things or not. This is not the issue. Extract what is there within your mind, just jot it down. Punctuation errors do not count here. Note keeping is also the same way. You make notes of all the ideas which are striking within your mind. There are different ideas which come in our mind at different moments. So if there is a notebook with you, you can keep that notebook, and whatsoever strikes, whatsoever comes within your mind all of a sudden, it can be written down on a piece of paper. And that will help you to think over it afterwards when you're free, because you already have the idea, and that will remind you of, oh yes, I thought about it. So that can help you as well. Brainstorming, whatsoever is within your mind, just think over it, start connecting all the ideas within your brain, and then come up with something. Whether you do free writing or clustering or listing to jot it down, but brainstorming basically happens over here. And this storming means that you are thinking about everything which comes in your mind, and then once you have thought about it, then you place it down on a piece of paper by either doing listing or clustering or looping, all the techniques which are there within your mind. Brainstorming happens here. Then mind mapping is also more organized form of brainstorming, because brainstorming is a bit haphazard, random, whatsoever comes in mind. Mind mapping is, you think of an idea, you start connecting the ideas together, and you are basically making a map within your mind, and then you place that map by drawing it on a piece of paper. It's not like a map of the world, map of ideas that are connected together. So it can be in a clustered form as well. You move ahead, there are the journalistic questions, the WH questions. So you ask those questions to yourself or to your friend, to anyone, to think about the idea itself. Heuristic methods, these are the ones which were also a bit technical, a bit tricky, but very much informative and can be very much useful. Cubing, the technique was basically falls within these heuristic methods, in which you look into the component through 6 different angles, and those 6 angles were, I have written them over here for basically mentioning them: describing something, comparing something, associating something, analyzing something, applying something, and arguing about something. So these were the 6 components. Even there are 6, which is why I thought I may not mix them out and not forget them, which is why I just mentioned them over here. So this is basically the way you look at the component from 6 different angles. And then talking about the mimics, this is basically the one in which you have a subject matter, you are working on something, so you look into it independent of all the other things. You look into that topic or the idea or the problem or the subject as a particle, and particle exists independent of every other thing. Then you change that nature of the particle or that problem, that how this particle changes over time, meaning you give that particle a wave-like nature, that it's moving now. So that problem, that idea, how does it change over time? And then you give it the third category, which is that how does it fit into a bigger context? How does that problem fit into the bigger world? So the example was of war that I gave you, that what is a war, how does it happen, and what is the outcome. These are the three categories in which war is given a category of a particle, a wave, and then how does it fit into a field. So look into it. You'll have my detailed talk over it as well within that lecture, but that's how we talked about it as well. Aristotle's common question, in which you relate one component with another, you compare with it, you contrast with it, and that is how you try to find your answers. Dramatism, Kenneth Burke, if I'm not wrong, this was the one who simply came up with the idea of applying the technique of dramatism. And basically within this technique of dramatism, you basically look into what is basically the act being performed, agency, how is it being performed, agent, who is performing it, purpose, why is it being performed, and the scene, where and when is it being performed. So that is how you basically, when you look into all these techniques, then you simply are able to come up with something. After applying all these techniques, you will be able to write at least, I'm just kidding, but 1 page at least. But I am sure that if you are applying them together, you can write many more pages, and you will be able to write within no time. So this is basically the component when we come to the pre-writing stage. Then you come towards the actual drafting stage, in which you have to compose a draft with a proper order, keeping a unity with the central idea by coming up with some supporting examples and keeping this link between all the points that you are mentioning. Then your order can be chronological in the form of some instructions. It can be spatial, in which you are providing some technical description. It can be about importance, in which you are talking about the goods and bads of reports and memos. Then of course you can talk about the problem solution, in which you basically provide a proposal, and comparison and contrast, when you want to provide some alternatives. Point to remember is that your draft is not the final copy, which means it's basically the preliminary piece of writing which has the space of all the editing, revising, removing, replacing, which is coming ahead. But what you can do over here with reference to drafting stage is that you must research, then organize ideas using the convergent and divergent thinking. Now this is also an interesting category of the thinking approach, in which if you have to go into the details of components, then you start from a single idea and then you start broadening it, you extend it, coming up with more details. So this is divergent thinking. Whereas if you are asked to just provide a very close-ended question, so extracting all the ideas together, you have to give a very short answer. This is convergent thinking, putting it all in a nutshell and then providing yes or no, or it could be a bit more but limited. So it's convergent. Whereas if you are asked to provide detail, you diverge. Your drafting also includes basically when you are writing, so a thesis statement, which is very basis of the entire paper, and then when you are coming up with the paragraphs which are coming ahead, you always provide a topic sentence which becomes like a thesis or the basis of that particular paragraph, and then right after that topic sentence you provide the supporting details. And within those supporting details, you basically provide all the research which you have done, on the basis of which you conclude things. And everything is written with unity and coherence. Now unity is basically or everything which you are writing is directly connected with a central topic, or call it as the thesis statement which is coming ahead. So things are, converging towards that thesis statement. Whereas coherence are the linkages which are there between sentences and paragraphs. So that together makes a net, and that net of interconnection is coherence. Then the finishing stage, or in which, as I told you, you have the space of doing the editing and revision. So this is basically the finishing stage, in which you do all the changes to the draft. How do you do it? You look into the draft and then you respond by having a self-assessment of that written, or you can give it to a friend for a peer evaluation. You're going to get some things pointed out, and for that, to remove them, you basically go to the next stage of revising. How do you revise? By applying the technique of ARRR or the A3R approach, in which you do add things, you rearrange them, you remove them if it doesn't fit, or if there is anything which can be replaced. So you basically do all these within the revision stage. Right after it, you edit it, and within this addition stage, you basically reread it for grammar. And this grammar basically refers to the one that you have got now within the last few lectures. You have to look for the word order, you have to look for the right subject verb agreement, and the tenses just the way you saw them. And then you move ahead to see what's left, and basically you do at the end, that is proofreading. Right after that grammar check, now you're going to have a little more scanning, within which you're going to see whether the headings are placed appropriately, whether is there any spelling mistake, are the words properly capitalized and italicized, and the punctuations are placed properly, and the format and the layout is okay, meaning headings, paragraph, illustration and colors, everything is there where it should be. And then you finally publish the document. That is how you basically do all the writing. But once you start writing it, then I told you, you have to keep certain points in mind, which are basically the 7 C's of communication, 7 C's of effective communication. So it all begins with clarity, in which I gave you this approach, Lucy approach. You apply it, keeping things simple and well organized, and using familiar words by applying the approach. And that means you can make things clear by proper length, keeping unity, keeping coherence, and emphasizing the most important point. So that becomes the Lucy approach. Then you move ahead and keep things concise by getting to the point with minimum use of words and avoiding redundancy and filler words. I just gave you the examples of the redundant words and the doubled words. So these have to be avoided as well, as they fall within the violation of conciseness basically. Then you provide a complete document, and completeness means nothing important is missed. Everything is there which is basically required. That's how you basically make a document more complete. Concreteness demands that you provide all the specifics, all the facts, all the figures, and cite all the sources appropriately. That means that you're making your content more concrete by coming up with all the citations. Correctness, you can call things as correct if they are factual. The facts and figures that you are sharing, they are authentic, they are valid, they are credible, they are reliable, and everything is grammatically precise. Means grammar is used properly, all the subject verb agreement, they are being followed, punctuation and spelling are used properly. In case of your consideration, this is the place where you step into the shoes of others and then look at the situation, that you are able to see what do you expect from the audience. So making a comprehensible and appealing content, understanding the nature of the audience. So if you know the nature of the audience, only then you would be able to state the benefits within the significance. And talking about courtesy, this is the place where you try to maintain respect and honor of your audience as well, by understanding their feelings and perspectives of the audience, respecting the audience. Non-discriminatory expressions should be there, because if you are discriminating between men, women, and different cultures, so that can cause a bit of problem. Generalize it, keep it gender neutral, respect all cultures, avoid expressions which may hurt the audience. You should appreciate them. And with that, we have covered one half of all the components that we covered within the whole course. In the next lecture, we're going to look towards the other half. But till that time, best of luck. Thank you very much, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Assalamu alaikum.